Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon to everybody who is watching us now, and welcome back to our series, mini college series by Professor Dan Schueftan, who is the head of the Strategic Security Program in Haifa University, and has many more titles, which I mentioned last time. And you can read, of course, if you Google his name, which results in many, many hits. Dan, welcome back with us. And the public, again, welcome you as well. We will start the second lecture in this mini series of lectures. Last time you discussed with us the political situation in Israel. Today, the topic will be the economic situation and the relations with the Europeans. We will try to hold this lecture within the hour, as some people requested. Dan will talk for the coming 35 minutes, after which we will have questions and answers. For that, you're all welcome to pose your questions in the Q&A button just on in the bottom of this of your Zoom screen, and please formulate them very shortly in order for me to be able and to read them and to try and structure them and to pose them to Dan. Dan, thanks for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, again, the framework, we spoke last time about the enormous difference between the political realities in Israel and the strengths of the Israeli society. We are speaking today about the economy, and because Europe is the most important economic power of Israel, trade partner of Israel, we will also discuss Europe and how it can affect the Israeli economy. And next time we will discuss security, focusing on the Iranian issue. Let me first speak about the Corona challenge before we come to the economic implications to the challenge itself, because it also teaches us something about the ability of the Israeli society to cope with emergencies. We've had, like everybody else, the surprise of the pandemic. Basically, we dealt with it well. The important situation is not if we had some mistakes and some learning to do, because everybody was acting, everybody around the world was acting in an environment of uncertainty. So the question was not who's perfect, but who did relatively well. Israel did relatively very, very well. For instance, we have a very low number of dead per million people. In that category, we are much better than the Netherlands, let alone France, Italy, Spain, Belgium. But we had a very low rate of death. If you compare to Sweden, which is the alternative to the strategies that Israel has adopted, the Swedes have per million 11 times as many dead as Israel. So it gives you the trend of, did we principally do the right thing? Yes. Was it like many other things in Israel, done at the very last moment on the basis of improvisation? Yes. Were we very well prepared for it? No. But the structure of the medical service, and this was the great fear of everybody, the structure was basically good. Unlike what you hear from Israelis who did not check the realities, we have in the last decade constantly increased the health budget more than the growth of the population. Remember, in Israel, the population is growing. So in terms of services per capita, it is increased considerably, almost every year, beyond the growth of the population. But the fear was that we will have very many serious casualties, not enough respirators. We are in a position today where we have between 20 and 30 people who are on respirators, and we have thousands of places in the hospital with the teams, with all the respirators, with everything you need to give them service. So even if we have another eruption today, we are very, very, very far away from the red line. So basically, we have contained it. But, and here comes a very serious consideration on the other side, this was done at the expense of the Israeli economy. So there was a decision taken here, and a cognizant decision. I mean, this is what the government decided to decide, that we have on the one hand the question of human casualties and the ability of the medical services to deal with it, and on the other hand, we have a medical catastrophe or a medical threat that needs to be dealt with at the expense of the economy. And the expense to the economy is very, very high. Let me just put these things in proportion. And this is really the very bad news part of my presentation today. For the first time in the history of Israel, we are going to have negative growth. Not even in 1966, in the major recession that we have, not even after the Yom Kippur War, the Second Intifada, the Second Lebanon War, did we have anything even comparable to what we're having today, because we never went beyond the line of having negative growth. Not only will we have negative growth, we will have considerable negative growth. In other words, we are speaking about 8%, the different assessments, but 8% negative growth when you already bring into account the fact that the population is constantly growing. So in Europe, you have some negative growth, but the population is shrinking. So per capita, it is not so bad. In Israel, since the population is growing, you had something very, very good. Nevertheless, the per capita economic problem is unique. We haven't had anything like it since the establishment of the State of Israel. But again, let's put it in proportion. When we didn't have negative growth, say in 66 or in 73 or in the year 2002, we had a relatively weak economy, certainly when we are speaking about the 60s and the 70s. Now we have a very strong economy. So if you have for 2 years to go down on your standard of living, that's not so bad, because basically the standard of living in Israel is good. So in a strong economy that was considered a very robust economy, and therefore we paid relatively little in terms of what the money cost us when we wanted to loan the money on the markets in terms of the interest, relatively low interest. We are in a good position. And when we are now in a position that is not good compared to other countries, our position is good because we have a reputation of paying our debts, of being able to come back to our previous economic situation. So we start from a good basis, but with a very major problem. Now, what is the answer to the economic problem as much as the democratic problem and the corona problem? Everything goes back to the society. Do you have a strong society or do you have a weak society? Now, let me give 3 examples. In our discussion last week, I spoke about the political system not functioning, but a strong society backing it so that Israel is a very robust economy. When we spoke a minute ago about the problems of the corona, with the exception of the ultra-Orthodox and the Arabs, we had a basically good approach to it. And even with the ultra-Orthodox and the Arabs, although it started off very badly, it developed into a more cooperative system. Even the ultra-Orthodox, even the Arabs fitted in, perhaps with greater difficulties, perhaps with some delay, but they fitted in. Now again, you're asking yourself, what is the mainstream of the Israeli society? And how can the mainstream of the Israeli society adjust itself to a new reality? Because it's not just you are being hit economically, and then the economy comes back to what it was before. This is not the situation, because the world economy is changing, the Israeli economy must change, we must adjust ourselves to the new realities. So the question becomes the question of adjustability, which is true to many things, but we are focusing now on the economic issue. In other words, will we find a way of making ourselves relevant in the new reality faster than others, having the advantage? Let me explain this point because it is of critical importance, not just for the economy, but also for the broader social and political and strategic picture. Israel is an exporting country. The markets have fallen by more than 10%, which is a very considerable amount. But not only will you have problems with international trade now, the question also is what is required. And therefore, the question is, how can you adjust yourself to the new requirements faster than others, so that by the time that others catch up and adjust their economies, we are already in the market as a small state who is geographically separated from others, who has some problems on the international level because some countries will not trade with us because of political reasons. We must be faster in terms of the ability to adjust ourselves than everybody else. What can we learn from the past? I think we've learned that every time Israel was presented with a unique and sometimes enormous problem, it was first of all hit by it, then it found a way to respond to it, and finally it benefited from it economically. Let me give you 3 examples to demonstrate it. Israel in the 1960s, the 1970s, was facing the kind of conventional wars that no other democracy had to face. Certainly not on its own territory. You can speak about the British in the Falklands, you can speak about America in Vietnam, but the kind of threat to the very existence of a state on a major scale with conventional weapons, Israel was the only case with such a magnitude. So Israel needed weapons. And certain countries, practically everybody, didn't want to sell Israel certain weapons, so the Israelis had to produce them themselves. Today we can buy them because we can produce them ourselves. So it may be cheaper to buy in other places where they produce greater quantities, but we have the technological ability and also the industrial ability to produce our own weapons. And then, because we didn't have a choice, we had to be very successful in producing weapons. Because we needed an edge, we needed to be very innovative in weapons. We could buy platforms, but in order to have an edge so that when the Arabs buy the same platforms, or even better platforms, we still have a military edge. We had to put in better electronics, better elements that will have electronic warfare, better control elements, better intelligence elements. So we didn't have a choice and we developed them. And after a while, we started exporting them. And Israel today is, if I'm not mistaken, the number 5 country in the world in terms of exporting weapons. I mean, we come after the giants of the United States and Russia and China, and I think France has a very major element of exporting weapons, but Israel is somewhere within the first nations that sell weapons, and billions of dollars come into the Israeli economy because we export the weapons that we had no choice but to produce ourselves and to perfect ourselves and to give ourselves a military edge. So you turn a problem into an economic benefit. Here is the second example. Israel was presented more than any other country with terrorism because Arabs specialize in terrorism. Palestinians among the Arabs are the greatest experts in the world in terrorism in terms of at least the magnitude, perhaps not the quality, but the magnitude of terrorism. And Israel is constantly facing terrorism. The result was Israelis became experts in counterterrorism, and today we export it for a lot of money. There is hardly a major international event where you don't have Israeli security experts who deal with the security, and Israel economically benefits from it. So again, you turn a unique problem, a huge problem, a very painful problem, among other things. You don't only give it an answer, a response, you also benefit from it economically. Take a third example. Israel is attacked more than any other country by cyber attacks. And in order to protect ourselves from thousands of cyber attacks every day by practically everybody, East, West, the democracies, individuals in democratic countries, in Arab countries, in Europe, what have you, practically everybody attacks Israel on cyber. So we developed cybersecurity, and Israel is a superpower in cybersecurity, and we export cybersecurity. So again, you have a problem of unique magnitude, you make money out of it. Fourth example, missiles. We are the only democratic nation in the world, the only open society in the world that is constantly attacked by missiles. Our cities are constantly targets of missiles from throughout the Middle East. It started in 1991 with 39 Iraqi missiles into Tel Aviv primarily, and it continued from Lebanon and from Gaza and from Syria and where have you. We have thousands, tens of thousands of missiles who were already fired on Israel, and we have hundreds of thousands of missiles that are prepared to or produced in order to be fired into Israeli cities. So Israel has developed the most advanced anti-missile system that anybody in the world has ever had. First of all, covering all of Israel, and second, having all the layers, from the layers of dealing with mortar shells and very small rockets, up to outer space with Arrow 3. So you start with Iron Dome. Now we're working on laser weapons. Now we have to respond to balloons, to mortar shells, to rockets, to missiles, to ballistic missiles, to intercontinental ballistic missiles that go in outer atmosphere and come back to Israel. So we developed all these systems, and again, now we're selling it. So once you have bitter lemons, you turn them into sweet lemonade. Israeli army needs to constantly be at the forefront with cutting-edge technology. How do you do it? In the Israeli army, again, here is the relationship between the society and the willingness to serve in the army and the fact that we have a universal conscription into the army. And then the best people in Israel, the most talented, develop weapons in the army. And when they leave the army, they take these talents and this experience, turn it to civilian products, and make money and sell their knowledge and sell their with billions of dollars. I mean, look at Waze, look at Mobileye, look at many things that the Israelis are constantly selling to the world, because it started developing it with very young people in the army for security purposes. These people go out into the civilian markets, develop civilian applications of cutting-edge technology, And what we have is, again, economic benefit. The Israeli society is very small relatively to the market, but very agile. It can adjust itself very fast. It proved it in the past. So my assumption is we will have 2 difficult years, and in 2 years we will adjust faster than others. And in spite of our shortcomings, we will find ourselves in a situation that can deal with the damage of the coronavirus and the closures and the precautionary measures that we constantly have to adopt better than others, faster than others. And you don't have to be better than anybody else in the world. You only have to be better than most. You don't have to be faster than anybody else. You only have to be faster than most. And then the overall picture is an economy hit hard, strong enough to sustain the first damage, and agile enough to adjust itself to new demands in the world. I'm sure the Israeli pharmaceutical industry will be very effective when it comes to dealing with the medical issues. We have our big data analysis on a very high level that again can be applied to problems that are now arising after the corona. You have the automotive capabilities of Israel. Israel is very good at it. And again, we develop a lot of it for the army, but later you use it for civilian purposes. So things that will be in demand, we have already worked on for other purposes, and therefore we can adjust them, we can apply them to other things. So this is an important discussion concerning economy if you just focus on the abilities of Israel. But now you need to discuss external restraints, and the most likely, although I think it is exaggerated in terms of the magnitude, but the most likely danger, the most likely problem can be Europe. Because the Europeans are constantly trying to force Israel to listen to them on issues where the Israelis don't want and will not listen to the Europeans. Because if, God forbid, Israel would have listened to what Europe suggested, Israel would not be in existence today. This is something that I have to prove, and I will do it in a moment, and we will discuss it also when we come to the security issue. So the only leverage that the Europeans have on us, because Israelis don't take Europe very seriously, because Europeans come up with ideas that you cannot take seriously. So the only leverage that the Europeans have on us is economic. But that's a very serious problem, particularly when you want to recover your economy after a major crisis. Israel depends on European markets. Most of the Israeli export goes to Europe. Israel also depends, and particularly universities and research institutes in Israel depend on European money that is given on the basis of contribution to science and technology, but you can, for political reasons, hold it back, and the Europeans are constantly holding it back and threatening constantly to hold it back even further. Now, when you speak about a few countries in Europe that are hostile to Israel, particularly Sweden, Ireland, Luxembourg, Belgium, sometimes Spain, then it's one thing. Israel can do without them. But when it comes to the big markets of Europe, when it comes to Germany, when it comes to France, when it comes to Britain, no longer part of the European Union, but part of Europe in terms of many attitudes, this can be a major problem for Israel. Let me explain very shortly, because I want to still focus on the economic implications. Where does the European attitude to Israel come from? And then explain how far it may go and how much harm it can cause. First of all, what is the origin? Europeans if you look at it in a generalized way, and let me perhaps say something about this generalization. There is a difference between Western Europe and Eastern Europe. There is a difference between hostile countries like Sweden and friendly countries like the Netherlands or Germany or Britain. Europe is not the same. Europe is not a monolith, but European elites are tending to a certain perception of the world that is completely cut off from reality. In Europe, you have a very interesting dichotomy. On the one hand, the greatest achievement of modern times, the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, is Europe turning itself from a slaughterhouse into a peaceful continent with a great quality of life. And that's an enormous achievement. There is also what we all recognize, my personal values, everything that I'm proud of, I've learned from the Europeans. So there's no problem there. But the Europeans, particularly after the Second World War, and more specifically after the collapse of the Soviet Union, have a la-la land perception of the world. They don't understand what's going on. They have a very strange idea about something called the international community. There is no such thing, unless you call the profoundly flawed United Nations a very problematic organization. If you call this international communities, then you must have a very developed sense of humor. And they believe that you can do almost without the use of force. Or if you want to call it in a different name, call it soft power, but almost without the use of force. Israel must use force every day. It lives in an environment that is hostile, that is sometimes barbaric, that is very violent, that is constantly unstable, where most people in the region constantly kill their neighbors. This is primarily what they do. And the only reason Israel can survive is that the radical elements are afraid of it, because Israel has demonstrated by the constant use of force that they can't do to Israel without being punished on a level that they cannot sustain. And the Europeans believe we should be part of the region and speak nicely, and then everybody will love us. They come with us with very strange ideas. Israelis must reject it. Every Israeli government will reject it. There is a tiny minority in Israel of about 2% of the Jewish population that will listen to such things, but the overwhelming majority of Israelis know that it's a joke. And the Europeans are trying to impose this on the Israelis by telling the Israelis, no, you haven't done this right and you haven't done the other thing right. I can't go into detail because we're very limited with time, but if you combine this attitude, which is the most important, with anti-Semitism that is still in Europe, it is not the most important feature, but it is always in the background. And when you look at the European guilt concerning colonialism that they want to answer at the expense of Israel, Israel cannot listen to what the Europeans are suggesting. And the Europeans know that the only leverage they have in order to force us to listen is to threaten economic punishment on Israel. Now, Israel has a problem, but no dilemma. The problem is the Europeans can really hurt Israel. No dilemma, because listening to the Europeans is not an option. If we would have listened to the Europeans, God forbid, Saddam Hussein would have had nuclear weapons, Assad would have had nuclear weapons, the Palestinians would have continued their second intifada and terrorized Israel out of existence. You can't listen to Europe. Europeans, no sane Israeli government will listen to Europe. And the Europeans might punish Israel economically. Now, this will be a problem, perhaps a considerable problem, but not a major threat. And let me perhaps end my presentation today by explaining why, on the one hand, it can hurt Israel, on the other hand, why it will not be a decisive element that will undermine the reconstruction of the Israeli economy. The Europeans will not boycott Israel completely. I don't think that major European countries will do it. The European Union, which is the most hostile, will not be able to get 100% consensus, so it will have to be done perhaps with the encouragement of the bureaucracy of the European Union, but not by the European Union, namely all the countries of Europe. There are enough countries that will be friendly to Israel, and most European governments are either fair-minded or friendly to Israel. I mentioned the hostile. This is not the majority of Europeans, and even if the Europeans become more angry, then I don't think we will have the majority of European countries hostile to Israel, and it will be done on a bilateral basis. And the bilateral basis between Israel and individual European countries is much, much better than the relationship between Israel and the European Union. The relationship with the collective is bad. The relationship with individual countries is mostly good. And in this Europe, I don't think that the major countries will boycott Israel. Will they perhaps hurt Israeli academic institutions and Israeli research institutions by not allocating money? Yes, it will be a problem for them because Israeli science is so advanced. Even the Europeans need the Israeli science. Israel is a scientific power. It is not a scientific small state. In terms of science and technology, Israel is a power. In some fields, Israel is a superpower. So will it be easy for them not to cooperate with Israel? I don't think so. Can they create and will they create difficulties? Yes, but countries boycotting Israel altogether, I don't think is an option. The second thing is, in Europe, whatever you don't get in a straightforward way, you can get by bypassing European systems. Europe is so disorganized that Israel will find its way. We did it in the past when it came to weapons. We can do it economically. Again, will it create difficulties? Yes. Is it convenient? No. But can it be done? Yes, it can be done. So to come back to the overall picture, have we dealt successfully with the coronavirus compared to other democracies? Yes. Do we have a serious economic problem? Yes. Can we deal with it? Do we have, in terms of our robust infrastructure and our experience concerning what we've done in the past, do we have a good legacy here? Do we have a good reputation here? Yes. Will Europe perhaps be problematic for Israel? Yes, but can Europe undermine the Israeli economic recovery? I don't think so. I'm not even sure that most European countries would want to undermine the economic recovery. Maybe they will give us some advice. We will take some marginal parts of it so that they're happy, throw them a bone here or there, but never listen to the essence of what the Europeans are suggesting to Israel. And can the Israeli economy recover in spite of these difficulties? Yes, very much. Now, how will we know? We will know very soon based on the investments in Israel. So far, the shekel is far too strong. The shekel is now 3.8 shekels to the euro. I would be delighted if it will be 5 shekels to the euro. I would be delighted if the dollar is not 3.6 shekels, but again, 5 shekels or somewhat less to the dollar, because I would like to have a weaker shekel, but so far the shekel is so strong because people are buying shekels to invest in Israel, and they're selling dollars and selling euros in order to buy shekels to invest in Israel. So we will know soon, because we also depend heavily on investment. And I think that investors trust the Israeli economy to adjust itself and to recuperate. So very soon we will know if my prediction that you heard this afternoon actually reflects reality. Let me stop here, 35 minutes, and open the floor for any questions or comments that you may have.
Thank you very much, Dan. Exactly on time, very sharp. Maybe I should start with the last question that I see on my screen. And this is the question about annexation, because I think you refer to sanctions from Europe as a reaction to the...
Just a minute, just don't hear you very well. Let me put an earphone and see if it helps. Yes, you were starting to say about the annexation, yes?
What I'm saying is I presume that you were talking about sanctions to Israel as a response to the annexation plans, which are being discussed and, of course, are not clear yet. And the first question was here, is an annexing the Jordan Valley, is it in such a strategic importance that it's worthwhile risking those sanctions at all? And what should Israel take as risk?
Well, first of all, I would not listen to any European advice on the issue, because if they can force us to do something about yes annexation or no annexation, tomorrow they will try to force us to do other things that I will very strongly disagree with. So it's not just the annexation business. The Europeans basically are telling us you must reach an understanding with the Palestinians. Every sane Israeli knows that the chances of reaching an agreement with the Palestinians is zero. I mean, it is not small. It is non-existent. And even the so-called peace camp in Israel, and it's very, very, very small, this camp, no longer uses the word peace, because they know that they will be laughed out of the room. So they say something like political horizon or something, because otherwise they will just become a joke. We cannot wait for the Palestinians to agree, because they will agree to nothing. What the Palestinians are saying that they want is something that they were already offered in 2008, and they rejected it. And they're not willing to accept it now, and they have this fantasy of the right of return, and they want to dictate Israel what it can do on issues that are detrimental to the security of Israel. Let me put it to you this way. Practically everybody understands that Israel must control the Jordan Valley at least for many, many, many years, okay? This will not work with the Palestinians. You cannot get their consent to it. So to end the discussion, annexation of the Jordan Valley can be a good idea. A, because it is absolutely necessary for Israel to separate the Palestinians from the radical elements that are west or that are east of the River Jordan. And second, because this is what will defend Jordan. But my suggestion to you is the following. This is a very long discussion. Next week, we are dealing exactly with this issue. Namely, we're dealing with the security issue. And then I will explain primarily the Iranian thing, because it is 100 times more important than the Palestinian issue. But I will also discuss the Palestinian issue, and then I will explain that there are two very, very different kinds of annexation. The one is to annex every settlement in the West Bank, and this will be a catastrophe. And I think that Israel will not do it. And I have been fighting against it for a very long time. It is a very major mistake, not vis-a-vis the Palestinians, vis-a-vis Israel. Okay, it will be a very major mistake. But having Israeli sovereignty over the Jordan Valley or the settlement blocks is something very reasonable. And of course, the Palestinians are against it. And of course, the Europeans are with the Palestinians automatically. You don't even have to ask them. They basically go with the Palestinians, okay? So if the Europeans will say, don't do it, or else Israel will still do it. Will it have an impact on the Israeli decision? Yes, but marginal.
But excuse me, if I understand you well, you're saying we'll discuss this extensively next week. So we will not discuss these issues anymore today. Okay, so I will try to arrange the questions that were posed.
I can't hear you very well. I can't hear you very well. Again, please.
I am okay. The questions.
Oh, now better. Now it's much better.
I must apologize because my Zoom tells me that there is some internet issues on my part of the world. So I hope it will not damage our conversation too much. The questions regarding the impact of the COVID-19 virus. Some questions regarding the Israeli economic specifically the real estate, and some questions regarding what will it do to the Iranians and what will be the impact on the Israeli feeling of threat from Iran as in the economy of Iran, the society, the Iranian society impacted by the COVID-19 virus specifically, and would it have any impact on the political hegemony of Iran in the area?
Again, let me discuss this next week because most of the discussion next week will be about Iran. So I will bring in the problems that the Iranians have with the economy, with the American sanctions, with the coronavirus, with their military disadvantages vis-a-vis Israel. All of this is one package, and please let's discuss security issues next week. If possible, let's discuss Israeli economy or Israeli society or European impact on Israeli economy now, because I want to lay the groundwork for the security considerations next week.
Okay, I hope public you heard this. That will mean I will not pose many of the questions that we'll pose today with regard exactly to this issue. Okay, there is one question about the gas export and the gas pipeline plans to Europe. Another question concerns.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. The line is very bad. What was the question again?
The question regards the situation and the status of the gas projects in Israel, the gas dwelling and the gas pipeline and exports to Europe.
Ah, okay. Okay. Look, concerning the pipeline, the gas pipeline to Europe, what I understand is that there is no determination if it is worthwhile economically. Remember, the price of oil is now very low and the price of energy is very low now. And even when it was much higher, the question was if the very, very costly pipeline that will go from Israel through Cyprus and Crete and Greece into Europe, perhaps into Italy, if this is something that is economically viable. I don't know, and I think many investors have second thoughts because of the drop in the demand for energy and the drop of the price of oil. So that's one problem. The second problem is that the Turks, Erdogan, is trying to do something very dangerous that may lead to a confrontation with Israel. And this is basically to say that Crete does not exist, and therefore the economic exclusive zone in the Mediterranean of Turkey and Libya is cordoning off the Eastern Mediterranean so that anybody who wants to bring a pipeline through this area will have to satisfy Erdogan. And Israel will have to confront him on this. And the question is, who will force his way through? this is not something that you have agreements on. This is something that you either accept what Erdogan is trying to impose, or you do your shtick and you understand that Erdogan will not confront you by force. So again, it is too early to consider it because it is not yet clear if it is economically viable.
Thank you. There is another question, and this is regarding the local market in Israel, and especially the real estate market. Do you expect that the corona crisis will have an impact on this real estate? And I should add to this a totally different question regarding, do you expect that there will be a gulf of immigration to Israel, or maybe the other way around, outside of Israel because of economic problems?
First of all, let me make clear here that I'm not an expert on the Israeli real estate market. Let me give you my impression, but somebody more knowledgeable may give you a different answer. The basic problem of Israel is that everything is concentrated in Tel Aviv, and we have a terrible communication system. In other words, if you want to work in Tel Aviv and you want to live outside of Tel Aviv, you have a terrible communication systems. First of all, a primitive train controlled by the trade unions, namely whatever is controlled by trade unions doesn't work. And you have a system where to come to Tel Aviv from a place that should take 20 minutes takes you an hour and a half. And therefore, the prices in Tel Aviv are some of the highest in the world in terms of real estate. We are much more expensive than Europe and much more expensive, not much, but more expensive than Tokyo and New York, okay? We have very, 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 very high real estate prices in Israel. I think that if you have a wise Israeli government that will enormously invest in public transportation, we will see a different reality. Let me tell you, as advanced as Israel is in many fields, we are only today building an underground system in Tel Aviv 100 years too late. And we have a system here that if you fix it, then you don't have to live where you work. You can commute in the way that in Europe is very effective. And if you have a small country like the Netherlands or Israel, commuting in such a country should not be a problem. It should be very easy. So if we reach the level of the Netherlands when it comes to communication, I think the prices in Tel Aviv, certainly if you reach the levels of countries who are more advanced in the world, then it will deal with the prices in Tel Aviv. Is that a good guide for investing or not investing in real estate in Israel? No. But strategically, if you look at the overall picture, I think this is what I can say about real estate systems. Now, remind me what the second question was?
Do you expect that there is going to be an immigration from Israel abroad because of the economic problems, or maybe vice versa?
I don't know if we will have a major influx into Israel, but I doubt it, because actually today the vast number of Jews outside of Israel live in the United States, and with all the serious problems of the United States that we see now, and by the way, I'm amazed with what is happening in the United States, I don't see it bringing many Jews coming to Israel. In Europe, there are very few Jews anyway, so the numbers are not like what we had with the Russian immigration or the immigration from the Arab world. that we've seen in the 60s and 70s. So I don't expect a major influx, and I don't expect a large number of Israelis leaving Israel. At the moment, I mentioned it last time, at the moment we have a very low number of Israelis leaving Israel, and I'm not speaking about relocations for 1 year or even for 5 years. I'm speaking about leaving Israel. Living in Israel is a much better life than living outside of Israel in the view of Israelis, okay? Now, I also think that this is true objectively, but I don't care about objectivity in this question. I care about the subjective feeling of Israelis. And in my judgment, this is what Israelis feel because they answer in public opinion polls in a very different way than they actually act. And even in public opinion polls, in terms of asking them about their own future, they answer very, very positively, so that Israel is on the top layer of what is called the happiness scale in the world. So will you have a minor increase or decrease? Maybe, but not something substantial. I would not expect it. And look at the numbers. Don't look what the journalists write about it, because very often they walk in Berlin, they meet 20 Israelis, and they say all of Israel has moved to Berlin, or their friends migrated to Israel, and then they migrated to Germany, and then they say everybody is migrating. The numbers show that per capita we have one of the lowest numbers in the OECD. In most European countries, there are more people per capita leaving these countries than Israel, and I don't see any reason for Israelis to leave Israel because of the economic situation, because there is an economic crisis everywhere in the world. And in Israel, the chances of recuperation are better than in most places.
Well, the conclusion for those who are hoping to buy a house in Israel, you are not going to buy it cheaper in a few months, if I understand you well. But I have the next question. Yes?
You need to come to Israel regardless of the price of housing in Israel, but this is not the discussion that we're having today.
Yes, of course. Some people ask about the economic relations with the United States on the one hand, economically, and with China on the other hand. And people are concerned about the pressure that the United States is putting on Israel regarding its economic relationship with China. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, that's a very important question. And I think that Israel behaved irresponsibly. And I'm delighted that the United States put pressure on Israel, because I think the Americans are right and Israel was wrong. The Israelis were trying to maximize investment from everywhere in the world, and the Chinese come with a lot of money. But what the Chinese want is to buy the Israeli innovation, and therefore they've invested huge money in the Technion, and universities are always starved for money, and basically they bought themselves a ticket into Israeli innovation. The Chinese are also trying throughout the world to take charge of major infrastructure, ports and so on, and unfortunately we were stupid enough to let them into Haifa port and Ashdod port, which are the only two ports in Israel. And I think it was grossly irresponsible. Wherever the Chinese, look, until recently, people considered China to be an opportunity and a danger. Today, there is a much deeper understanding that China is primarily a danger. It is using the economy in order to get strategic advantages. And if the Chinese replace the United States as the country that determines the world order, this will be a catastrophe for freedom. And the Europeans, as always, are being irresponsible. This is what Europe is about. It is about irresponsibility. And therefore, the Europeans, when it comes to economic issues, are willing to trade with the Russians against the Americans, with the Iranians against the Americans, and with the Chinese against the Americans. Because America is not perfect and the Europeans are more perfect than America, then they cooperate with the worst enemies of Europe in the long run, because Europe has short-term considerations. Unfortunately, Israel also went in this direction. Fortunately, the Americans told us that they will not accept it, and therefore Israel is now doing the right thing, unfortunately not because we understood that it's the right thing, but because the Americans told us what the right thing is. But better late than never.
Somebody is suggesting that Israel will try and open a free trade zones with Europe. Would you be in favor of such a thing? And maybe it's interesting in this context also to discuss the free zone areas Israel already has.
I would be in favor of increasing any kind of economic cooperation with Europe, but the Europeans are obsessed by the Palestinians, and no matter what you ask them, they tell you, when you will make peace with the Palestinians, we will do this and that. They are now considering downgrading the relations with Israel, not upgrading. Israel wants to upgrade the relations with Europe. The Europeans use economic pressure in order to pressure Israel to go to do what the Europeans want on the Palestinian issue, and this will not happen. It will simply not happen. No Israeli government will do it.
Maybe continuing on your answer, what would you recommend Europe to do in order to improve the relationships between Israel and the Palestinians?
Look, the Europeans cannot change the modus operandi of the Palestinian people. The Europeans cannot do it, the Israelis cannot do it, the Americans cannot do it. The Palestinians have brought catastrophe on themselves for 100 years. They always took the wrong decisions. It is a Palestinian tradition to take the wrong decision. This is what they always did. In the Second World War, they went with Hitler against the Allies. Even after the war, when the leader, the Mufti, the Haj Amin al-Husseini, was the leader of the Palestinian movement, they stuck to the Mufti in spite of the fact that he was considered a war criminal. They rejected the partition in 1947. They fought against the very existence of Israel in the 1960s. After 1967, they made the PLO their representative, openly saying the destruction of the state of Israel. When they were offered after 1967 a number of times a Palestinian state, they constantly rejected it. In 2008, Ehud Olmert offered them 100% of what Jordan lost in 1967 by land swaps and partitioning of Jerusalem, and even, unfortunately, some gesture concerning the refugees, and they rejected it. This is something that Europe cannot change, America cannot change, Israel cannot change. The Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, for instance, half the Palestinian people are openly saying they want to destroy Israel, and they speak about the protocols of the elders of Zion, and they are not even pretending to willing to accept the state of Israel, and they destroy the lives of their children. The Europeans cannot change it. Nobody can change it. What you need is a recognition of reality. The problem of Europe is that it is unwilling to recognize reality. It lives in the fantasy of cheating itself as if the Palestinians are only waiting for a more generous Israeli offer. And by the way, they're also hurting the Palestinians. Not that I care, but they're also hurting the Palestinians because it gives the Palestinians false hopes that they consider to be, that they can continue to be negative on everything, and the Europeans will be behind. Look, my suggestion to Europe would be to stop trying to bring into the Middle East what the Middle East does not accept. And this is peace and democracy. The Middle East needs other things where Europe can help enormously. The Middle East is dying of thirst. If you would focus on water, just on this one issue, millions of people in the Middle East lose their livelihood because of water, and the Europeans invest billions on bringing democracy to a region that doesn't want democracy, and on bringing peace to a region that never had peace and will not have peace in the near future. And when we had a peace agreement between Israel and Egypt, between Israel and Jordan, the European impact on this was exactly zero. Exactly zero. Europe cannot play in this league. It is not a world power. The fact that it has 550 million people and a strong economy doesn't make it a world power, because it is not willing to use force. It doesn't have an army. Nobody takes them seriously. So my advice to Europe is worthless, because the Europeans will not listen to it. Since Israel will not listen to Europe, I would suggest to Europe that they stop giving advice that Israel will not listen to. So I will not give advice to Europeans, to Europe, when I know the Europeans will not listen to it, because they have the fantasy that they can bring peace and democracy to the Middle East, and that's a joke. And unfortunately, my sense of humor is not developed enough.
Well, well. I think this is a lot of food for thought for us all. And I guess for Sidi in particular, because our work is here in Europe and we are trying to inform Europeans about problems related to Israel and the Middle East. So there is a lot of work for us to do. But unfortunately...
Just a minute. Here, it's very important for me to make a comment. I think that what Sidi is doing is very important, not because I believe that tomorrow the European Union will accept it as a policy. Because we have many, many, many friends in Europe, and they need to be encouraged, and they need to be given credible information, and they need, those of them who are willing to be persuaded, we need to make the effort in order to persuade them. So I think this work is tremendously important. People who are constantly trying to bring reality to Europe, even if they don't score a success so that Europe changes its ways, I think that A, the enemies of Israel need to be confronted, B, the friends of Israel need to be encouraged, C, the people who are open-minded need to be informed, and these three elements are very important. Unfortunately, I can tell you that Sidi will still have to exist also in 20 years, because you will not be in a position to say we've achieved our objective, now we can dismantle ourselves.
Okay, even more food for thought. Thank you very much, Dan. Our time is over, unfortunately. I think there are so many more questions I would have liked to ask, and I see some questions coming up, but we have to stop now. I want to thank you again very much. I want to thank the listeners and everybody who attended this lecture, and we'll see each other in a week's time, same place. Thank you very much, Dan.